Good morning and welcome everyone. Akwaba, Asante Sana, Karibu Sana, Akwaba, Bienvenue, Ekabo. Welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. It's Africa Comms Week, and I am so delighted to welcome you to this event hosted by the Comms Avenue. Now, if you have not heard of the Comms Avenue, we are Africa's leading capacity building and networking platform for communicators across the continent. If you are on our platform already, please put it in the chat. Tell us that you're from TCA. And I'd like to know where everyone is joining in from. So can you put in the chat as well what country you're joining us from, your name and what country you're joining us from? You're all welcome this morning. I'm very excited about the conversation we are about to have this morning with our distinguished panelists. But before I get ahead of myself, my name is Sharon Ann Adaigbe. I am co-founder of the Comms Avenue, which I just spoke about. And we are hosting this event to speak about something really, really important. We will be discussing this morning the path to a borderless Africa, and asking ourselves, or even answering the question about the role that African communicators have to play in achieving that lofty ambition. So welcome everyone. I see you, Florence from Nigeria, yes, TCA and Deta from Kenya, you are all welcome. I'm going to give just a few minutes for other people to join in, but I see that our panelists are here. I see, yes, they are here. Mildred Tabane, Samuel Osei, Whitney Wangi, you're all welcome. I will quickly read out your intros and then we will get started. Okay, so we have Mildred Tabane with us this morning. She is an award-winning communications specialist with over a decade of experience in telling authentic stories that resonate with consumers and build brands. She has had the privilege of executing impactful communications strategies for some of the world's leading brands and personalities, thanks to her belief that all problems are solvable. Mildred has superb writing and editorial skills, particularly the ability to distill complex ideas into accessible internal and external copy. She has experience in growth hacking, media relations, and social media strategies, and has worked with teams across Africa, the United Kingdom, Canada, and USA. You're welcome, Mildred. Our second speaker is Samuel Osei, and Samuel is an experienced strategic communications leader and public speaker with expertise in reputation management, brand positioning, media relations, and digital communications. Driven by his passion for storytelling, Samuel founded Think Stories Africa, a knowledge-sharing, networking, and skills improvement platform for communicators across Africa. He is the Communications and External Relations Manager at Newmont Ghana Gold Limited. And in 2018, he was named the Ally of the Year and awarded for supporting and promoting the careers of women within the company. I love that. Samuel is passionate about the African story and believes the continent's communicators must lead in reshaping its narrative. And that's really what we're going to be talking about this morning. Our third speaker is Whitney Wangi, and she currently works as a health communications and advocacy specialist at the African Union Commission. She leads strategic policy-level communication and advocacy that advances the continental 2030 goal to end AIDS, tuberculosis, and eliminate malaria in Africa at the AIDS Watch Africa Secretariat of the AU Commission. Whitney is also a passionate advocate of youth empowerment, and to this end, she's the founder of the Storybook Africa, a creative enterprise with a social purpose to inspire, educate, mentor, entertain, and influence the youth in Africa to make informed decisions on their healing, growth, and development. She also serves on the African Leaders Malaria Alliance Youth Advisory Council and RBM Partnership to End Malaria Youth Workstream, providing strategic advice on youth-related advocacy action plans for the fight against malaria in Africa. You're all welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. For those who are just joining, please put in the chat where you're joining us from, and we are about to kickstart the conversation. So today we're going to be talking about what I call an ambitious vision, but it is delightfully ambitious. And that is the vision of a borderless Africa. And just like some of us already know, the AU 2063 ambition is really about creating a united Africa that's prosperous in multiple ways. But there's so many things that stand in between, that vision and its reality. And one of those things is, not just physical borders, but the mental borders that keep us from collaborating and from achieving our potential as a powerhouse. Hello, Alexis. Hello, Samantha. Welcome everyone. I think most important, will be the narratives that we hear about our continent. If you take a look at some of the common narratives about Africa, they have to do with poverty, about instability and wars, and not very pretty pictures. I mean, if you live on this continent or you're African, you know that that's not the whole story. There's much more to us than all of these things. And these are some of the things we're going to be talking about as we open up the conversation. We're going to be asking ourselves, how can we as communicators play our part in telling the real story, the multifaceted story about Africa? And how can we enhance collaboration across the continent so that the AU 2063 goals are achieved, and so that the world sees what Africa really is, all her glory and her true potential. Thank you for joining. So I think we will start with, in alphabetical order. Let's start with Mildred. Mildred, welcome. Can you just share with us, in your opening statement, the role you think that African communicators need to play in this vision, this grand vision of a borderless Africa?
Thank you so much, Sharon, and thank you, everybody. I think it's exciting for us to gather on Africa Month. And I think, as communicators, we have such an important role to play. And I think sometimes we don't see the importance of the role that we play. If you look at other countries that just thinking about, for example, if you think Paris, you think the city of love, there isn't one thought that comes to mind when we think about Africa other than poverty, other than the begging bowl. And I think we really, really, as Africans, need to come up with a narrative for this continent. I think we all need to see ourselves as African first. In my work, working across the continent, I still see a lot of isolation in terms of the countries, countries, even just in Southern Africa, if I think of Zambia, if I think of Zimbabwe, if I think of Lesotho, Swaziland, there is such a difference in those countries. There is such a isolation within those countries. We don't really see ourselves as one Africa. And I think as communicators, we need to start breaking down those borders. We need to start breaking down those boundaries. We really need to start being more collaborative. I think that's quite important for me, really being more collaborative, really looking for opportunities to work across borders, and I found, platforms like the Comms Avenue are really, really doing well to sort of break those brand boundaries, break those borders, having people on one platform who can share insights, who can, share what's happening on the ground. Even though we one Africa, we're so different, and we really need to learn from each other. I think Africans, need to travel more. We need to make travel easy across borders, cancel visas, and all of those things, so people can really cross borders much easier. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mildred. I'll go over to you, Samuel. In your opinion as well, what are the things that African communicators need to be doing and thinking about as we look to the borderless Africa vision?
Well, yeah, thank you very much, Sharon. And can you hear me okay? Sharon, can you confirm if you can hear me? Whoa.
Yes, we can.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to join this platform this year because, the Comms Avenue, the platforms like the Africa Communications Week is really very critical if we must really get to where we want to get to as a continent. Let me start off mine with this. In 1957, Ghana became the first, country south of the Sahara to gain its independence in Africa. And I remember that on the, when I say I remember, it's not like I was there, but on the Declaration of Independence, Ghana's first president, Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, made a statement when he said that the independence of Ghana is meaningless unless it is linked up to the total liberation of the African continent. Now, at the time, what he meant was that already Africa was borderless. So Ghana could be free, but if Nigeria is not free, we are confronted by the same dangers that faced Nigeria. So that single statement that Kwame Nkrumah made about the fact that the independence of Ghana is meaningless unless it is linked up to the total liberation of the African continent spurred on a new generation of young people. At the time, Sekou Touré from Guinea, Nyerere, Tanzania, Kaunda, Zambia, Nasser, Egypt. It spurred it on and to a large extent helped to totally liberate the continent of political independence or political dependence. And although we did not achieve the aims of the United States of Africa, which is what we really wanted to achieve, we kind of set the tone for something great to happen. Now, one of the reasons why the OAU did not achieve that aim was because we were so politically tied up to our borders. I didn't see Nkrumah, for example, giving up his presidency in Ghana and let's say allowing Nyerere to become the president of the United States of Africa, so that he could be a governor. I didn't see the same for any other leader at the time. So politically, we've never been able to break the barriers. And I'm afraid to say, I don't see us breaking the political barriers in a long time to come. But then the good news is that when it comes to storytelling and when it comes to you and I who have the opportunity to communicate, we are already breaking the frontiers and we're already setting the stage for us to be able to do that. And so like Mariam said, platforms like the Comms Avenue, the Think Stories that I do, Africa Communications Week are very, very important platforms. But then if we talk about the Africa Free Trade, the AfCFTA, and Sharon, I don't know if I should get into AfCFTA yet, or you want my initial comment before we get into AfCFTA? I can continue.
Go ahead.
Yes, so we talked into AfCFTA. I think the first thing we need to appreciate is the fact that we need to break it down, move away from the technicalities and consciously begin to break it down to an everyday language where the ordinary African can understand, relate to, and run with it. So for example, if you talk about the American dream, the American dream is something that you meet a child on the streets in New York and they'll be able to tell you. The packaging has been so well done. The messaging is so consistent and clear that everybody will tell you America is the land of gold, the land of opportunities, the land of everything. And we all want to go there because the narrative, they got it right. But you and I know that if you go to America, one of the worst things that we know it's the healthcare. The healthcare in America is very terrible. In Ghana, I can just within 24 hours book an appointment with a physician for surgery, for anything, and I'll have it done. You go to America, and even with insurance, it takes you several weeks, sometimes several months, to be able to access healthcare for critical conditions. But nobody will tell you that, right? So we need to come to a point where we ask ourselves, what is the narrative that we want to put out there about our continent, the African continent? And we can start off, and in relation to the AfCFTA, let's look at the economic pillar of the 2063 agenda. We look at the economic pillar because AfCFTA is all about economic borders and trading together and all that. What are the stories inherent that we want to project? Number one, we can look at our people. we can look at the success story. So when we see Aliko Dangote doing so well, breaking frontiers, do we describe Dangote as an African businessman doing well, or we describe him as a Nigerian businessman doing well? We need to consciously begin to project him as a success story for Africa. We need to project Mo Ibrahim as a success story for Africa, Fola, all our huge big business, because once we segment them into Ghana, into Tanzania, into Nigeria, we don't have that collective picture of ourselves. So for us as communicators, this is the time for us to research, because in storytelling, you need to know the story before you can tell them. How much of our success stories do we know as communicators? We need to consciously spend time to study and begin to communicate and tell the success stories of our people. All the blogs and the YouTube videos and the panel conversations and the write-ups and the magazines should project these people as African success stories. The other thing we need to begin to look at when it comes to trade and business is the fact that we have to now begin to look at region by region, sector by sector, and look at the, the unique selling propositions that we have and project it to the world as African, uniqueness. So for example, when we talk about Botswana, I know a lot of us know Botswana as the land for diamonds and rich minerals, but did you know that Botswana is one of the leading exporters of beef products to the EU, right? How can we take Botswana and market Botswana, write stories about them, show videos about them, do movies about them for people to know them as that, a hub for beef production? Because listen, all of us do go to Argentina and we go to the Netherlands for beef products. So I want to, as a communicator, come to a point where I will publicize Botswana so much that if somebody wants to go to Argentina, they will rather opt for Botswana as an option. And that is something that we communicators consciously need to do and tell these stories. The negative stories have been told enough. Let's leave it for those who are interested. But let us begin to consciously, for instance, Cape Verde, a very, very small country like Cape Verde. Do you know that they are building a tech hub for young people, right? To come there and access opportunities in technology. All of us here want to go to Silicon Valley in the United States of America, but to what extent can we package this as communicators and make it so appealing that the rank and file and the young people across the continent will begin to feel hungry to travel to Cape Verde just to go to the tech hub and access these opportunities and become better? So our role is a lot, but we've got to be very, very deliberate, and we've got to be very, very strategic. Recently, a Nigerian lady, broke the Guinness World Record for the longest cooking period, right? Hilda Bassi. Never heard of her, but after this, everybody on the continent have heard of her. And I go to Hilda's Instagram page and I go to her other pages, and I'm like, what a missed opportunity. What a missed opportunity. Because I've been asking myself, okay, she cooked and fed over 2,000 people. What kind of dishes did he prepare? What are the the recipes? Should her social media handlers not be posting? These are the 23 dishes that were prepared within the last 3 days in Nigeria. How do we access this attention that Hilda has gotten to draw attention to the catering industry in Nigeria? And even the entire farming value chain, to say that Hilda used egusi, and egusi is prepared by people in northern Nigeria. And that product is very healthy and it can cure this and cure that if you eat it, and this is how it is prepared. To the extent where somebody in Ghana will say that, let me begin to go to Nigeria and look for egusi and how, we can prepare it for Ghanaians to also benefit from that, right? So the opportunities are there, but we need to be very intentional. We need to be very deliberate, and we need to be very consistent to be able to position. Once we are able to generate that interest and we are able to generate that hunger, and somebody now begins to say, why should I go to China for shoes when I can go to Kenya because there's a shoe production factory in Ghana. Then we know in Kenya. Then we know that we are on the right track. So this will be my initial comment, but I'm sure we will delve into it and look at the hows and the channels and the other opportunities we can use.
Absolutely. Thank you for that very robust statement, Samuel. A lot of gems in there, and I think we'll pull them out as we go ahead. Whitney, can we have your own introductory remarks on the role of African communicators in delivering this vision of a borderless?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be on here, and greetings from a very cold and rainy Addis Ababa. So the initial speakers have quite gone deep into this conversation, and I believe we are all in line that we need to start telling authentic stories that are accurately representative of Africa, what's happening beyond the narrative of poverty and scarcity and, pain and suffering that we're already talking about. So without, being repetitive of what my previous speakers have mentioned, I would like to focus on two things that I think are essential for communication specialists, both upcoming, those who are already practicing, just to make sure that they're really thinking about that in terms of AfCFTA. Looking at it from the African Union perspective, this conversation has been happening for a very long time. And the one thing that keeps this conversation stuck is one, the inability of countries to agree. And sometimes it's not that the conversation is not clear and direct, it's because everyone is thinking about themselves. What is in this for me? How will my currency grow stronger? Or how will it remain relevant? How will my country shine? And yet, at the end of the day, the one thing that we need to be thinking about is collaboration, which has already been mentioned. So how can communication specialists make sure that we're building this spirit of collaboration? One, creating platforms, yes, for information, as has been mentioned, but also creating platforms where people come together as funding partners, for example, and the ones in needs, the ones who have gaps and needs, and the ones who are going to supply that. The greatest sense of prosperity for the AfCFTA is going to require a lot of funding. It's going to require a lot of commitment. And we know that there's a number of people who hold the money globally and even in Africa. But how can we have them in the same room, having the same conversation with the people who are going to need the money, the local women at the communities who will be at the borders, the business people, the small and medium entrepreneurs, how can they know the available funding and opportunities? So this is one area that I think the communication specialists can focus on, making sure that you, one, identify where the money is, where the resources are, and who are the ones who need them, and bring them together. And sometimes we complicate this thing. We are thinking about, sometimes we think about them from the perspective of, having a huge event. Well, it could also be a webinar, as what we are doing today, just bringing people together to talk about what's existent and how they can benefit from that. And then one last thing I think that communication professionals can really focus on is empowering our people to gain the necessary skills. And in skills, I mean hard skills and also soft skills. So hard skills would look like, how do you build a business? For example, you've heard about the AfCFTA. There will be an aspect of digital innovation. There will be an aspect of making sure that the gateway is easily accessible and people can move goods from one country to another, the common passport. So you now are getting the brilliant idea of being someone who can produce passports at a large scale. How do you succeed in that business? Given your professional academic background, how do you make sure that you get ahead of the chain? And these are the little things that make a difference. One of the things that I noticed with opportunity to be on, for example, interviewing panels, I see that there's a lot of Africans who are well educated. They've gone to the best of the schools. But when it comes to them tying the skills that they actually have to the current job market, we struggle in that. So having an opportunity where communication specialists can pinpoint for the people the areas of skills that are required in terms of making AfCFTA a success, and the entire Agenda 2063 of a transformational and self-led African development agenda. How can they make that a success? How can they be a part of that? And then when it comes to soft skills, people get really upset by the fact that people who have opportunities, they endorse people that they know, but it's a reality that we have. So to some extent, it's felt as though it's unfair, but even I want to win. And if I'm going to work with someone as a business partner, I'm going to pick someone that I can trust. I can trust that we can grow together because I've seen their character, I understand their values, their principles, I see their consistency, I see their strategy, and I see their vision. I know that it's someone that I can work with. So when it comes to soft skills, again, as I mentioned in the beginning, we have great ideas as a continent. And trust me, there are very many revolutionary ideas that are still sitting at the level of our heads of state because people just cannot agree. There's no humility to accept that there can be a leader and there can be a follower, and it's okay. So what are some of those skills? How do they look like? Emotional intelligence, relational intelligence, understanding how to manage yourself in difficulty. So I see how communication specialists can also bring together to understand, one, what are the skills, the soft skills, and what is required to be a person who can work with people from different cultures and make their business a success and also make the AfCFTA agenda a success. So I'll stop there. And I look forward to the conversation we are going to have today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brittany. So much has been said, from the three of you around storytelling, around highlighting our USPs and thinking of ourselves as Africans, and not just in the siloed borders that we typically think of ourselves in. I'm just going to talk about something because Samuel talked a lot around storytelling. And I remember the year of return when Ghana had that campaign in 2019, I believe, and it drew so much attention from people who really wanted to connect to their African roots. I think that was one of the closest, opportunities I saw where a country at this point was able to craft a narrative that was so compelling that it got, almost global attention. And I think, I don't know how much the campaign is still being pushed now, Samuel, but I think that is one of the things we want to be thinking about. What is that story? What is that unified story that we're telling? Of course, there'll be different strands to it, but, in the next round of questions, can we talk about some of the things we need to be highlighting, about our continent as communicators? Samuel, let's.
Right, Sharon, thank you. And so I think that I would start off with the last point you made about some of the things that we need to be highlighting. If you look at the narrative that the West has pushed about Africa for over the last 500, 600 years, or even since from the 50s, 60s, 70s, has been one of a continent of instability, a continent of poverty, and so on. Now there is a new narrative being pushed, which is the fact that we are, if you like, the next economic hub, or for Africa is the next. So the word next means that you are not even there. Economic hub. But when they say that, they take it from the angle of consumption. So Africa is the next place for people to consume whatever you produce. So if you're in China and you are producing everything and you want consumption, Africa is the place to target. So I don't know about Nigeria and Kenya and Uganda, but in Ghana, we are seeing all kinds of China malls all over the place springing up because they are bringing their goods here. We are seeing it in Europe and all the other places. But I think it is also now the time for us as communicators to highlight our industrialization stories. It may not be the biggest, it may not be the largest, but it is a story, right? I was speaking to a friend a couple of days ago, and he interviewed, young startups. And it's amazing the ideas these young people are bringing. In 2063, the vision for AfCFTA is for the 10-year-olds and the 15-year-olds and maximum 20-year-olds, right? It is not for those in the 30s and the 40s and beyond. So these are the people we need to start projecting. If a young university student is able to come up with a certain solution, it is time to project that. There are a lot of shoe factories in Kenya and all these other places doing very well. It is time for people to know that we just don't consume, we also produce. And when we produce, we should let our people know, so that if somebody in Mozambique is thinking about going to China, they will say that, but I have an alternative already in Zimbabwe. So why do I even have to go to China? That is where we need to get to with the narratives. And it comes with a lot of work. We need to research. We need to know what's going on. And we need to form the right alliances with the governments and so on and so forth to be able to know what is happening, so that in our own little spaces, we can project it. I do think stories. When we are doing think stories, there is nothing wrong bringing together Africans doing well to just come and share their story. Coms Avenue, you are doing a lot of fantastic work. I'm always on Ade's case for the great work Sharon and Ade are doing. This, you could create platform like this quarterly, periodically. Who are the big guys doing great stuff for Africa? Let's just talk among ourselves. And we communicators who get to hear it, we go and blow it out there. That is very, very critical. In terms of our brothers and sisters in the diaspora, sadly, in Africa, we start things and it catches fire and, we leave it at that. I am not feeling the same buzz as I felt in 2020 when Ghana had it. But Sharon, this is one thing that I have identified myself in around 2010, 2011, 2012, thereabout. I had a very strong connection with the African-American community in Ghana. And that's because I was telling a lot of stories and producing documentaries around slave trade and all this. And so I became part of their network. And one thing that I find out is that a lot of these brothers and sisters are struggling for identity, but Africa is not receiving them. Right? So, and I think one of the worst things that can happen to any human being is not to have an identity. So you are in America and they will call you African American. They will not even call you American. And so Floyd Mayweather is very angry. He said nobody should call him African American, because when they want to alienate you from the opportunities, then they call you African American, right? So a lot of them want to connect to their root. And we have to make the conscious effort to be able to accept these people, to be able to accept them as part of their own. Because I remember talking to some of them, they said they come to Ghana. It is so difficult to start a business as an African American, but it's very easy for a Lebanese or a Chinese to do that. So we want to consciously include them in the discourse, right, beyond the borders, so that they can be part of the agenda that we are driving right from the start. Then it becomes a movement for a people, not a people within a certain landmass or a jurisdiction.
Really well said, Samuel. Thank you. And Mildred, I want to quickly ask something, because Samuel touched on the point I was going to around diaspora communities. How can we also get them involved, and engage with them and encourage them to contribute to the development of the continent, not just with remittances, because we all know the stats on remittances. I think about last year, Sub-Saharan Africa alone received about $53 billion in remittances, and that's great. But in terms of being part of the narrative shaping, how can we encourage those in the diaspora to join this cause?
Absolutely. And I think something that Samuel touched on that is quite important is the topic of identity. I think as Africans, we need to get to a point where we are proud to be African. The moment you are proud to be African, wherever you go, wherever you are in the world, you are African first. And I think a lot of the times we would rather, if you look at people who, us Africans looking down on people who can't speak English properly, not being proud of our own cultures. I speak just here in South Africa. A lot of the languages, a lot of the culture is dying because I would rather be associated with the West. I would rather be associated as a good English speaker, and all of that stuff. The moment we start being proud of our identity as Africans, it will be so much easier for people in the diaspora to add to the narrative. What is that narrative? Why am I proud to be an African? And like Samuel shared, it's about sharing those stories. We don't share the stories. If you look at the success that Africa had in terms of in the COVID pandemic, the West was surprised as to why Africans were just not dying as much as people in the West were. And it's because we've got the knowledge, we've got the scientists, we've got, years of dealing with massive diseases. If you look at the AIDS pandemic and how we've dealt with and the lessons that we learned from there, but rather than sharing that as a good story, it was seen as there was something wrong. Then we were left out of getting certain cures and things like that. So I think really we as Africans need to start being proud of Africa. Once we start being proud of Africa, then there's no need to encourage people to be part of the movement, to be part of the storytelling. It becomes natural to then start sharing the African story, start sharing the African good news wherever you are on the continent. And I think once we start ingraining that, in countries like America, from the moment you walk into school, the culture, the patriotism of your country is literally taught as another subject. You are taught about all your country has achieved. You are taught about all the amazing things that your country is doing. And we don't, in our schools, we're still learning about the history of the West. Yes, it has an impact, but we don't learn enough about our own history. We don't know about the amazing stuff that our people have invented, our people have come up with. We're sitting here with so much knowledge of the West, and we ourselves see ourselves as a begging bowl. And I think that needs to change. And as communicators, we really, really need to start pushing for our governments, for the different spheres that have influence, our education, our health, everywhere that we go. We need to start pushing that narrative of who Africa is, the positive history of the continent, not just the fact that we were slaves to many countries around the rest of the world.
That is so powerful, Mildred. Thank you. I think we really can understate what education and breaking down mental barriers can do, as we push towards this vision of a borderless Africa. If you have any questions at this point, please put them in the chat. I'll speak to Whitney in a bit, and then after that, we'll take some questions. So please put them in the chat. Whitney, I just want to quickly ask you around, collaborating with stakeholders. We've mentioned so many things, we've talked about being very deliberate about crafting the narrative for the continent. We've talked about the need to create platforms, but I'm also aware that there's only so much that we can do. We have to have deliberations with stakeholders. There are people who have political will, political might. And so how can we as communicators in the private sector, even in the public sector, really begin to influence some of these decisions in, having the borderless Africa vision in mind? What are some of the things that we should be doing or thinking about as we engage with stakeholders?
Absolutely, and thank you, Sharon, for that question. I think it's a very interesting conversation, and to me, it again boils down to trust. If I'm going to give you time as a leader, I need to know that my time will have return on its investment. So I would recommend that we envision to fill the gaps. And what are these gaps? It may look like us going back to the AfCFTA charter, the treaty itself. What does it entail? What are the pillars on there? What do we envision to achieve? Understand each one of them. And if you're targeting one country, I've heard Samuel talk about examples from Ghana. I've heard Mildred talk about examples from different countries. So how do you see those numbers? What is the progress? Which are the areas that are lagging, and making them very specific to the issues? Again, how we have these conversations and the tone of how it's communicated is very important. The leaders, they know the areas where there are gaps. They don't want to be reminded and get a sense that it's a war between us telling them what they have not done, what they could never do, and how we are so disappointed in them. That never works. We have it at the back of our mind, but that is not what is going to strengthen the political will. So how do we have a conversation, even among our colleagues, our counterparts in the West? How do we have the conversation of telling them, look, I see you're doing well in this area, but there are gaps in our area in this particular agenda. How can we come together to improve that? And once we start having those conversations in a collaborative tone, in an environment that is conversational and leading to actionable points, I think that should be able to strengthen our partnerships. And then also filling the gaps within ourselves. This has been talked about quite a lot, about embracing your authenticity and your Africanhood, let's call it that. But what does that really look like? You know that there's a lot of background that has come with us being African. Maybe you grew up in a background that is not very fortunate. Are you able to put that behind and believe in abundance and know that you can push that narrative and know that you're capable of bringing this conversation together, telling the authentic stories and being a true representative? Because in my perspective and the people that I meet a lot, they're really thinking about the aftermath. They're thinking about the crown, knowing that I am known by Dangote. I can call him. He's, on the other end of my WhatsApp. But what does that really mean for the people? Are you able to commit to the process? Are you that person who, again, your character, your skills, your understanding, the information that you have can be able to put you in a room and keep you there? And people will be looking for you as the key, the contact to your community. So I believe these are some of the things that we should think about in terms of engaging stakeholders and identifying partnerships. And once you have that understanding within yourself, you fill the gap, it becomes easier for you to understand which partner to engage, because some partners are treacherous in themselves. They're just thinking about how at the back of their mind or at the end year report, they will be saying, oh, I'm engaging this African country, I am saving them. But no, that is not really what is happening. You want a partner who values you and they will bring value. So you cannot address accurately what you don't see accurately, and what you're not accurately, and what you don't see fully. Right? So we have to envision to see the AfCFTA vision fully and embrace it fully, and then now engage our partners and stakeholders from that wholeness and perspective. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you so much, Whitney. See how from your perspective, trust is really the bedrock of all these things. And I see your point as well as to we coming to the table with selfless motives and selfless agenda. Because if we are looking to actually do the work and not just receive the accolades, if we lay down our egos and our own agendas and pick up the collective, that sense of the collective is, I think, something missing a lot of times. A lot of us, probably because of scarcity and lack, a lot of us just think of the individual, myself. How can I empower myself? How can I enrich myself? And we've not yet embraced that sense of the collective and doing what is best for all of us, even when it may not be entirely beneficial for me as a person. So I think that would be my takeaway from what you've just said. Thank you so much. Okay, so as we begin to wrap up, and I'm still expecting questions. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. If you want to raise your hand to speak, you can do that as well. But let me just take one more round of questions and then we'll get into the chats. I think something that I'm really saddened about, especially because I'm a little active on Twitter. You know, I see that a lot of times we still have these prejudices and stereotypes that keep us divided. You know, they're typical things that people think about Nigerians, you know, some other things that people think about South Africans. And, you know, you see this play out sometimes in public marketplaces like Twitter. But how can we, you know, come together as communicators and help to begin to erase some of these stereotypes? What should we be doing practically in all of our spheres of influence to get rid of these prejudices, these stereotypes, these biases, so that we can actually come together as Africans and do the work that is ahead of us? I think I can start with Mildred, and then we'll go to Samuel, and then with me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, in South Africa, I think we've had the worst of it, sadly. You know, every now and again, you know, we've got xenophobic sort of uprisings that come, which is actually devastating because, you know, if you look at the history, especially in South Africa with apartheid, where some of our leaders, you know, needed to go to other African countries, either for safety or, you know, to sort of get more support in terms of the fight against apartheid, and how, because that history has not been communicated, you still see South Africa as a very sort of isolated country within the continent. And there are still very real sort of ideas about African people. And I think in our spheres of influence, we really need to start talking about our interactions. And I think for me, the biggest thing is making traveling across Africa more important, making it easier, making it cheaper, making it safer. Because I think we will never understand, we will never appreciate any other culture if we're always sitting at home and listening to the narratives of other people. You know, I've had the privilege of traveling across Africa. I've worked with a lot of African people who've delivered such high caliber of work, such amazing insights. I've learned so much, and that would not have been possible if I had not opened myself up. You have to experience other cultures. You have to experience it in order to learn. And I think, you know, in terms of that, it's not something that you can read in a book or whatever it is. We really need to get Africans traveling across Africa, make it a thing, make it exciting. We need a campaign where, you know, travel within your continent, make it cool, make it exciting, you know, make it the thing that celebrities are talking about, that it's cooler to go to Ghana, to go to Nigeria, to go to Ethiopia than it is to be going to New York or whatever the case may be. And that's when, again, that pride of being African will start to grow. For me, yeah.
So well said, Mildred. Thank you. Samuel, I see you have something to say. Yeah.
I was actually clapping for Mildred on that point. Love, 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 love it. Maya Angelou said, human beings are more alike than unalike. And what is true anywhere is true everywhere. But it takes traveling to unlock these possibilities. So I really like the point she makes about traveling, and I will not repeat that. But I would also say that in addition to that, we need to look at the area of the arts. It's a very important area that we often ignore because we think it is only for entertainment. And I tell you what, when I was growing up in Ghana, you know, in even in the 90s, in the 80s and in the 90s, I used to see Nigeria as very far away from Ghana, you know, not just geographically. I didn't see them as close as I see them today. But in 2001, or I think, the Nigerian, you know, film industry and the Ghanaians came together for the first collaboration. They had a movie called The Visitor. And, you know, Zach Orji and Les Benson and all these guys that I used to think they were living on Mars came to Ghana and they were talking to the same journalists that I see on TV. They were, and they produced that movie. Since that thing started, I've seen Nigeria and Ghana getting closer and closer than before. It is the same with music. You see Ghanaians collaborating with other. I think we have to be very deliberate about how we can use the arts to, bring our continent together. I see that already it is happening. We just have got to be very intentional and strategic about it. I watched a Nigerian series on Netflix, and all the actors were Nigerian, but I could hear Ghanaian names. And I know they were using that to target the Ghanaian market. And sometimes you hear them using South African names. These things are very, very powerful, right? So we need to also use these to bridge some of the barriers. Since 2017, I go to Cape Town every February. And each time I go, I say, oh Lord, I'm back home. That is because I no longer see South Africa as, some other place that one can just jump. So travel is one, but we need to see how we can use the arts and how the people we like can come together and, speak the same language and get us to admit and accept that we are all one. And if you say there are criminals in Nigeria, there are criminals in Togo, there are criminals in Benin, there are criminals everywhere. And I remember I have godparents who are Nigerians who've taken so good care of me. And I remember, there were a couple of armed robbery cases in Ghana, and the people were Nigerian or spoke like Nigerian. So, Nigerians are criminals. And I'm saying, well, Nigeria is about 20 times our population. So they are likely going to be more good people in Nigeria than Ghana. But in that same way, they're likely going to be people with vices more than Ghana in terms of the numbers. So we need to reorient ourselves, but we need to use our influence and let those who look up to us see what it takes to come together. And a lot will change if we do that.
Thank you so much, Samuel. I really agree that we need to do a lot with the arts. I didn't even put a comment to say, that there are opportunities with movies, music, fashion, and even sports for cross-continental collaboration. Whitney.
No, but as for sports, I want to see Ghana beat Nigeria and South Africa in all football games.
No, not going to happen. Whitney, over to you. How do we get rid of prejudices, stereotypes, so that we can push for this borderless Africa vision?
I can see Samuel is about to start a war in the chat. Let's hope it doesn't go there. But yes, power to all of us as Africans. I really loved what Mildred was talking about in terms of embracing, making it cool to move around. And well, the unfortunate bit is that it is expensive to travel through Africa. But again, as Samuel has said, when we get the chance to do it, if you have the privilege, show others that this can be done, it is being done, and it's worth it. And I believe for us, again, just going back to what has been said by the previous speakers, once people get to your country, I beg, what are they going to get? This is what needs to ignite us and empower us to travel to those countries. I would like to give a story of a mission that I went to in China. And it was a meeting to talk about HIV among adolescents and youth. But they structured that meeting to run across an entire week as a training, a workshop. So they would bring representatives from these programs across different countries to meet their representatives handling these programs in China. And the way they sat us in the room, it would be the representatives from Africa on one side and the Chinese on the other side. So it felt very conversational. It's almost like we are, in a dialogue. And then through that week, they made sure that we went for tours through research centers, some of their hospitals, both private and public. And it was very interesting to see some things, even the way their hospitals are structured and how maybe they have dispensers that have, like testing kits, etc. You just pay, you key in your number, and then it sends you the results on your phone number, these little things. And to me, it was really inspirational. And then the cream on the cake, they made sure that they took us around for tourism. They got us on one of their best trains that takes us around through their villages and their cities, having different perspectives. And from then, I would have no problem going back to China, despite what people say, because I have already tasted it for myself, and I made sure that I share this with my colleagues and counterparts and inspire them to go. So us as Africans, as communicators, how can we play this role when people come as our friends, colleagues from different countries? How can we show them that AfCFTA is possible? And also, I like to talk about one critical pillar of the AfCFTA, the digital platform. A lot of us are not paying too much or enough strategic attention to the digital space, but COVID-19 taught us something. There was a platform that was developed, I believe, under the leadership of Strive Masiyiwa and a lot of other envoys that were appointed at the time. And this platform allowed for countries to go online, order for a number of protective equipment like masks, etc. for their health workers in their country. They pay online and then they order them and they are brought to the country through Ethiopian Airlines. This is the first of these kinds of mechanisms that was developed for Africa in time. So it shows that it's possible. Do we know enough about these kinds of innovations as communicators? Do we know how we can trickle that down to our level and advance that to the AfCFTA and for the future generations? So these are just the little things, being curious, taking that on, and yes, to being strategic and very intentional about how we approach the whole agenda of cutting down the stereotypes and segregating each other. We are one, we're really just the same. Yeah, thank you.
We are one. Thank you, Whitney. Okay, so I think at this point, I'll take questions. I didn't know you've had your hand up for such a long time. I'll take your question and then we'll go into the chat.
Thank you very much. Just checking that you can hear me. Okay. So thank you, Whitney, Sammy, and Mildred. Like I've just been nodding and smiling here, but I'm also thinking about the practical implications of all the things that we're talking about, because after we leave this webinar, what are the practical steps? And I'm thinking in terms of platforms, and Whitney, I'm happy you shared that platform that Strive Masiyiwa pioneered. And it's, how do we have a central place where we're pushing out these stories across the continent? So if you go on LinkedIn, for example, you have Africa No Filter, Moki Makura, that's doing a great work in terms of trying to shape positive narratives. She recently did a post about an article on load shedding in South Africa and how it came from a negative frame. There's Mimi Kalinda, who is always showing, I really love to see her post on the different exciting things across the continent, but those are people in different silos. Is it possible for us to have like a central platform where you're seeing everything about what's happening in Zambia, Namibia? I went to Zambia for the APRA conference and I was so surprised. Zambia is beautiful. We went to Livingstone. I remember there was a presentation by the CEO of Stanbic IBTC, Sonny Zulu. He showed two sets of pictures. One was luxurious properties, and then one was the slums. And he said that, do you know that those slums are pictures from Europe and the luxurious and beautiful places were from Africa? But in the media, you're not going to see that. How do we begin to do that cohesive platform that pushes out this content that we can then enable collaboration? So the BAL is going on now in Kigali. Why didn't we infuse music from across the continent, culture from across the continent? You know, I'm just thinking of the big, large picture. So if any of you can answer that question, that would be fantastic. Or maybe it's a question that will keep on going on after this. Thank you.
Thanks, Adedoyin. So, Samuel?
I think that's a very thought-provoking question. And it's always difficult to get people together. And the best place to start usually is on platforms like this, right? And we need to consider whether we can have a joint regular meeting or a platform of a sort, right? This is Africa Communications Week. Okay, so let's say that 3-4 key organizations decide that every quarter we are meeting, what are the key stories? Or we create an app or a platform where people can dump the great stories from their continents. That I think would be a good place to start. But I was also thinking, and this is also a very big picture, the AfCFTA, do they even have a communications plan to go with the vision? Right. All these things that we are talking about, is anybody engaging Davido? Is anybody, engaging, South African art industry? Is anybody, crafting the message? Is anybody beginning to have, let's say, a This is Africa series, which will be aired on major platforms across the continent? Is anybody managing some very influential social media platforms that on daily basis puts out those stories? So look, we can decide on Africa Communications Week, Africa Comms Week, Think Stories, come together and say, let's engage the AU and decide that we will support. It's going to be sacrificial probably from the beginning with some kind of consultancy from a communications angle. The AU would have to think about funding, and let's drive a certain deliberate strategy to put ourselves out there and to be consistent. Let's start with, say, for the next 10 years, for instance, and review it afterwards. Or we can have a short, medium, and a long-term strategy to go with that. And I think that all of us here, there are consultants, there are people owning agencies, we've done this. We can come together and support with that. So that's just one of the ideas that I can also support at this question with.
Thank you so much, Samuel. I hope that is sufficient for you. I see Kanisa has a hand up. Can you unmute yourself? Tell us where you're joining from, and then go ahead with your question. Kanisa.
Hi, everyone. I hope you are all well. I just want to say thank you so much for the information that you have been sharing. I'm very insightful, and also to Tahana, if I'm saying your name right. Thank you for speaking for us here in South Africa and just acknowledging some of the things that we face and the stereotypes that we need to deal with. So I come from a company called Let's Talk GovApp. We aim to break the borders, right, by enabling people to communicate with their municipalities. That's one thing that we do now. But we are also aware of the agenda and how we want to have a borderless Africa. So my question to the panelists and to everyone here, how are we supporting initiatives, technology ideas that are developed by young people to foster this agenda? What platforms are there? What's the opportunity? How do we bring this working project that has been developed to actually be used and be considered a very valuable tool to make sure that as Africans, where you are, we can have one platform where we can all communicate. Thank you.
Hi, Kanisa. Thank you so much for that question. Look, I think in terms of having one African platform, I mean, Africa is the biggest continent, right? So I think that might be a bit too ambitious. I think, social media has really opened up and made reaching the people you need to reach to much easier. I think young people need to be fearless about knocking on doors. Don't stop knocking on doors. Don't stop reaching out to people. Don't stop using platforms such as this, platforms such as LinkedIn. Reach out to people. We've mentioned a couple of people here. We've got Ade, we've got Mimi Kalinda. There's so much people that it's so much easier to get to right now. And I think we really need to be more fearless about those things. I think there's so many platforms, and if you're looking for the one platform or the right platform, I don't think there is one necessarily, but I think there are a lot of platforms that you can take on and really start pushing your messaging. And I think the people that I've seen who are being successful. You know, I've seen people grow. I've seen people become literally superstars. And it's all by knocking on doors, by being fearless, not stopping. If you believe in something enough, don't stop knocking on doors. Don't stop reaching out to people, emailing people. You know, even if you call radio platforms and say, I've got this initiative, you never know, you'll get the airtime. But don't be siloed in terms of thinking there's one platform, there's one right platform. There are so many platforms. Use them all.
Thank you, Mildred. That's a fantastic response. Florence, I see your hand is up. After Florence, I'll take Alexis's question in the chat and then we will call it a day. Florence, please unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much for these discussions. I think for me, one highlight was about our African story. And I loved how the first speaker was saying this, the American dream. But what is the African story? But then as communicators, aren't we the gatekeepers of that narrative? I mean, if people out there know us for poverty, for war, for violence, which role do we play as the gatekeepers in shaping that narrative, in dignifying our people, so that we are known for more than just violence and poverty, so that we are known for art, so that we're known for excellence, for philanthropy and all that. So for me, it's just to challenge us, even in our different roles. It may not be as huge as putting together platforms, but in our own roles, we should be very proactive in shaping that narrative and ensuring what goes out and what tells our story dignifies us and allows people to understand the Ubuntu, the Africanness, and the power that we are as a people. So that's just one thing that I was thinking about as the different conversations are going on. Thank you.
Thanks for your comment, Florence, and really, really important that we take individual responsibility for our collective progress. Okay, so there's a question from Alexis, and it's for any of the speakers or in fact, everyone. And this is the last question. Are there any projects you're working on right now that is a strong collaboration across at least one national border? What's been successful and what unexpected challenges have you faced? Any of the speakers can start off. Thanks, Mildred.
Yeah, I can jump in on that one. Yeah, so I mean, a lot of the work that we at Phukuzi Projects Africa are doing is really addressing the issue of how do multinationals develop sustainable CSI projects and CSI projects that really address actual needs on the ground. So we are working, you know, with companies like the Michelin Tire Company, they're a French-based company, you know, working with companies like, for example, MultiChoice and things like that. And I think, you know, one of the things that I've learned is really you need to collaborate because, you know, the issues being faced on the ground in South Africa are very different from the issues being faced on the ground in Nigeria, in Mozambique and that sort of thing. And I think for me, that collaboration has made us then tailor solutions for our clients to say, okay, yes, we can have sort of one theme in terms of CSI, but how do we then make sure that those projects are relevant to each country? How do we nuance them in a way that we know is relevant, that we know is sustainable? You know, for me, I think the biggest thing is skills transfer. You know, a lot of the time we want to sort of give handouts and give aid, but a lot of the solutions we bring into the table is how do we empower people and how do we change people's mindsets that when they are empowered, they want to empower other people, so that you've got a cycle of skills transfer, you've got a cycle of sharing knowledge, of sharing skills, so that it's not just one generation that or one community that is then successful. You know, you've got this chain reaction. So that's the biggest learning that I've seen in terms of that collaboration and really working with people on the ground.
Thanks for sharing your experience, Mildred, and I hope that answers your question, Alexis. I think we are now at the end of the session. This has been such a brilliant conversation. I took a lot of notes, and I'll just say a couple of things that, really stood out to me. The first from Samuel was really about the need to be intentional about this narrative that we want to put out about our continent. We talked about, from Mildred, making travel cheaper so that people get to experience the beauty in the different cultures and the different experiences that we have on the continent. We talked about the need to be proud of our identity as Africans wherever we go, and that being the starting point of any other thing. We also talked about the need to capitalize on the arts because they are gaining traction, not just in our continent, but across the world. And that is the one way that we will be able to communicate the truth about the beauty of our continent, beyond the stereotypes. We talked about empowering our people with soft and hard skills, education being very important. And we talked about creating platforms because we can't keep waiting for people to come and save us. We need to save ourselves. We need to create those platforms where we showcase the brilliance of the continent, showcase what the minds are doing, the brilliant business minds are doing. And together, all of these things, as I said, individually coming together will push us collectively in the direction of this vision, this lofty vision of a borderless Africa. So at this point, I want to say thank you to our speakers. Thank you, Mildred, Samuel, Whitney, for taking time out today from your schedule to join us. And thank you to everyone who has participated, asked a question, listened, taken notes. And I hope that together we all, go back and take some action on one or two of these things that we've heard today so that we actually begin to see, the vision of Africa, without borders emerge. Thank you so much, everyone. Yes, so as I mentioned at the beginning, this session was hosted by the Comms Avenue, a capacity building platform for communicators across Africa. We currently have over 1,200 members from over 20 countries, and we are, of course, welcoming new members. So feel free to join us. Visit our website, www.thecommsavenue.com, to find out more. I think the information is in the chat at this moment. So once more, thank you, everyone, and please have a brilliant rest of the day. I hope to see you again on some other platform talking about Africa and how we as communicators can make the continent great again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Samuel.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.